Hello and welcome. You're watching our rolling coverage of G20. We continue to bring you all the updates here on News 9 in the last couple of hours. A lot has transpired by the way of the first inaugural session where Prime Minister stood up, spoke for the very first time, addressing all G20 nations, their representatives. He started with offering his condolences to the people who've died as a result of a massive earthquake in Morocco. 600 people are dead as of now. Let's quickly dip into what Prime Minister said before we start.
G20 के प्रेसिडेंट के तौर पर भारत पूरी दुनिया का आह्वान करता है कि हम मिलकर सबसे पहले इस ग्लोबल ट्रस्ट डेफिसिट को एक विश्वास, एक भरोसे में बदलें। यह हम सभी के साथ मिलकर चलने का समय है और इसलिए सबका साथ, सबका विकास, सबका विश्वास, सबका प्रयास का मंत्र हम सभी के लिए एक पथ प्रदर्शक बन सकता है। वैश्विक अर्थव्यवस्था में उथल-पुथल हो, नॉर्थ और साउथ का डिवाइड हो, ईस्ट और वेस्ट की दूरी हो, फूड, फ्यूल और फर्टिलाइजर का मैनेजमेंट हो, टेररिज्म और साइबर सिक्योरिटी हो, हेल्थ, एनर्जी और वाटर सिक्योरिटी हो, वर्तमान के साथ ही आने वाली पीढ़ियों के लिए हमें इन चुनौतियों के ठोस समाधान की तरफ बढ़ना ही होगा।
All right, those of course were bites of Prime Minister Modi speaking at the inaugural session of the G20 Summit. He touched on a host of issues, but more importantly talked about Sabka Saath, Sabka Vikas and Sabka Vishwas. That's a new slogan coming in there from G20 at this point. Let's quickly dip into this conversation further. With me in the studio are my colleagues Rakesh Khar and Karthik Malhotra. Thank you very much for being with us here, Rakesh. I want to first begin by asking you, we've been discussing this. The day is finally here. Not a lot coming out of what's happening inside the closed doors, but I think the ball has now been set into motion by Prime Minister.
Absolutely, Shweta. Thank you. First and foremost, I think the addition of African, Nations Union, that's a big outcome already on the table. And Prime Minister used the speech early morning to formalize the entry of that particular bloc, making it G21. So I think that's a big outcome. But obviously, the discussions are on. The first session was on Earth. The second one is, the planet, I guess. And then finally, in the evening, there is going to be some amount of communication on what exactly happened during the day. Both these sessions are off camera, so in that sense Prime Minister's speech is being televised as it is expectedly, and you rightly mentioned that he has mainstreamed this particular slogan and transitioned it from, or pivoted it importantly, from the domestic constituency to the international constituency. I think the trust deficit that he repeatedly talked about is as an area where I think India can play a huge role, bridging the gap between north and south, east and west, and within blocks that exist today. I think there's a huge headroom that India has in terms of its ability to persuade people to come on a table and discuss ideas frankly and fearlessly.
All right, and while we wait for more details to come out, people are anticipating a lot more. They've been out on Twitter, out on social media, discussing, debating what could be the likely outcome. But in a sense, there is some sort of hope. There is commitment that has been made by the government, by various governments, of course, to what can be achieved. My colleague Krishna Kumar walking into the studio at this point, and perhaps will run us through what is the chatter on social media. How are people feeling it? How are they taking it? There is a sense of excitement which is palpable, Krishna.
Absolutely. I can't take my eyes off the top India trends on X, formerly known as Twitter. Top trending hashtag for the past many hours since daybreak is hashtag G20 India 2023. And we've got that over here, hashtag G20 India 2023. These are the other ones that are trending, hashtag G20 Bharat, because all that news about Prime Minister Modi's name placard at the G20 being called Bharat and not India. So has the process already begun? Lots of chatter about that. So hashtag G20 Bharat, hashtag G20 agenda clearly since morning. and then there is I-20 Summit Delhi. These are, and look at the way, look at the refresh rate for some of these hashtags over here. They're just flying. Because that's top of mind for so many people from India, top trending in India. Well, look, I'm a movie fan. I know when a big movie releases on that day, top trending is that movie. And today, this looks like the movie of the day. Definitely is the G20 Summit. Huge discussion whether you're interested in geopolitics or not, global politics or not. India is hosting the G20 presidency, and that being lapped up, resonating, reverberating on x.com. So that's what we've got over here. And that's because, Shweta, the updates are fantastic. Look at the photographs of all the global heads. That's being tweeted, retweeted. Let's get some visuals in on that note of some of the big people who can have a significant economic impact, as part of this G20 summit. Because bear in mind, we always keep discussing the economic relevance of G20, and to that effect, some apart from all the big global leaders, from Joe Biden to Olaf Scholz, who have made it. There you have Ajay Banga, former chief of MasterCard of Indian origin, pride of India, now head of the World Bank, walking in. What a moment that was when India is hosting the G20 presidency. This is certainly a moment of pride for India. It's come a full circle, a global Indian coming back to India for its moment in the sun. There's Kristalina Georgieva, who is the chief of the IMF, also making her way over here. Strangely, this is a G20 summit where the multilateral development bank reforms are going to be seriously discussed, yet IMF too making its presence felt. And Shweta, as you're talking about visuals of her dancing have gone absolutely viral in that pre-G20 summit celebration that took place. A very happy, cordial handshake, friendly even, they're bantering for those few seconds.
All right, I'll just have to quickly interrupt you, Krishna. We have visuals of French President Emmanuel Macron, who's just landed in Delhi. Let's cut to those visuals. All right, I think he's already been received. He will be headed straight to the venue. So yet another addition to the long list of people who we're discussing.
What an economy like France. I mean, old trade partners, France and Germany. I was just wondering, we saw Olaf Scholz in the morning. I was wondering, where is President Emmanuel Macron? Finally, he's here joining in the party, the G20 summit party here in India. So fantastic. We're also showing, just before this, if we can bring that visual back of Ursula von der Leyen, who was there, who also came in the morning. Ursula von der Leyen, the chair of the European Commission. We're talking about technology a lot. European Commission versus big tech is a big story. So Ursula von der Leyen making it. So, these people, Ajay Banga, Ursula von der Leyen, Kristalina Georgieva, all these people are indicators of the economic significance of G20, from World Bank to IMF, the chiefs being over here. So Shweta, so this is the sort of party starter, if I may.
Okay.
So all the talks and the deliberations are going to take place as we speak, and then of course all eyes on that final communique. And if India can pull a rabbit out of the hat in these extremely polarized, divided times for the G20 summit, I'm keeping my fingers crossed that India will pull out a better G20 summit than any other country, Shweta.
All right. Will there be a final New Delhi communique? We don't know. But I think a big headline that's also come out, and Karthik, a big headline that you've been in fact tracking is by the way of strengthening India-US ties. They've strengthened like never before. And we saw that big hug between both the President of United States and Indian Prime Minister. He was received for a private dinner by the Prime Minister at his home. There was a series of discussion, a bilateral talk between the two countries, and this morning received at the pavilion by Prime Minister again. A lot has happened in the last 12 hours.
A lot has happened in the last 12 hours, Shweta, and a lot has happened actually over the course of the last few months, ever since I think Prime Minister Modi in the month of June traveling to the US and really bagging a lot of technology-driven contracts back for investment in India. And add to that, I think news that is coming in today is this new act which is being introduced in the Congress in the US, where export of electronic components, export of IT, export of technology to India is actually going to be strengthened even further. And this act incidentally is introduced and hopefully will get passed, where India gets elevated from the tier 3 stable of exports for the US and really climb the ladder up, where it becomes imperative and easier for a trade of technology to happen between the two countries. So I think that's a significant milestone which is happening on the sidelines of the G20. But let's come back to what we really have on the table. In the month of June, we already had Micron and we had Applied Materials, both semiconductor players and strong names in the space of semiconductor manufacturing, and Applied Materials also into electronic components outside of semiconductors, inking deals about manufacturing in India. Now cut to G20, and the precursor to G20 you also have NVIDIA, and NVIDIA partnering with two of the largest technology players here in India, Reliance Jio as well as Tata Communications. So it's and all these semiconductor artificial intelligence based deals are coming at a time when China is being sidelined on purpose, sidelined on purpose, because it is not in the interest of the United States of America to let China gain access to proprietary technology that US has developed. And NVIDIA pretty much banned from exporting its semiconductor fabs to China or even sharing technology with China. Add to that China's absence from G20, and India and US now closer than ever before. The handshakes and the hugs and all the trade, stitching the same story, weaving the same story together. That these are the best of times for India and US. And what is really bridging this India-US tie right now is technology, and this technology is not limited only to semiconductors and artificial intelligence. Incidentally, you have two more companies also that have signed almost cumulatively $700 million worth of investments, which are likely to happen in India. But coming back to what is stitching these trades together or these ties together, in addition to semiconductors and artificial intelligence, is defense. And you have the Hunter drones, you have the GE engines which will go into India's indigenously developed Tejas aircrafts made by HAL, Hindustan Aeronautics Limited, and all these ties really coming together at a time when both nations are heading into an election year next year. And both countries have their own quarrels with China, and China being very conveniently absent from G20. So I think there are a lot of, there's a lot to read between the lines here by way of India and US strengthening their ties, India and US for their respective reasons falling out of their relationships with China on trade, on technology transfer, on import-export curbs. So I think a lot happening in the geo-economic order, perhaps which is very closely linked to the geopolitical order.
All right, and before I bring Krishna back on what, the high-tech export curbs that have been lifted, which essentially means the US will now be looking at transferring more tech and technology into India, what that new bill or act will envisage. Before I get to that, let me also bring this question up to you. And as we decode this process of, bilateral talks on the sidelines, one of the questions that a lot of naysayers will have is that it is a multilateral platform. While it's important for India and India's interest to have conversations on the sideline, China's absence and India's growing, friendship with the US, especially on tech, where China is banned, how is that likely to play up on the global platform?
Well, right from day one, we expected, bilaterals also to shine light during the G20 discussion. So I don't think it's out of sync. Whereas the focus is on G20, the multilateral forum, where we got African Union as G21. But, these 2 days or these 48 hours are going to be key pivots in terms of bringing about independent relationships between various countries. And I think Karthik is absolutely right. India has really, so to say, raised the bar in relationships with US. And my own view is that there is a durability in the relationship which is, in a way, which is devoid of any government there or here. I think even if there's a government change, whereas there may be some tweaking here and there, but the fact of the matter is that over the last 2 decades, it all began with Manmohan Singh as the Prime Minister, who laid the foundation for a new era in India-US relationships. From thereafter, Vajpayee of course did his bit, but thereafter, there's been a consistent growth in the relationships between the two countries. See, defense was one very, very important area where India didn't look up to US. So all that is now, the menu in relationship between India and US is complete now, with India really, really going big on, defense deals with US. And you talked about multilateral forums. I think it's important also to point out that, you know, we should love China for bringing India together, and also leading to two parallel platforms happening, I2, U2,
Okay.
India, Israel, USA and UAE. So that's a big ticket idea that's happening. It's supposed to be the new Quad, and it's economics at the heart of it, and obviously geopolitics follows. And as G20 star attraction by the end of the day, I guess, I don't have full details, but I think we will have a big ticket railway project being announced as part of a slightly tweaked to ITU2 formation,
Okay.
which is India, Saudi Arab and United Arab UAE and US, where there is you know, a new transport railway project being talked about going through the length and breadth of these countries.
Right.
Not to US, but US driving this initiative with India.
Okay.
So Saudi Arabia, UAE and, you know, India and US. That announcement, I guess, is going to happen by the end of the day. And independent of that, obviously I2U2 is big ticket, India, US driving a new age identity together. All this is, Shweta, to counter China. So Indo-Pacific ambitions of China is getting all these new formations on the table, and we have to watch them with a lot of interest how they really shape
And
up.
I'm sure Chinese officials will be watching them with a lot of interest.
As
Some of
well.
them who are here, and the Chinese premier who couldn't perhaps
Incidentally,
make
I
it.
don't know whether you know, but I mean, it's important to point out, Karthik, that today the Chinese premier, president who didn't come here, he is meeting two countries, very interesting, Zambia and Venezuela. And he's extending a very long rope in terms of debt to them.
That's
meeting
And Zambia
that's exactly
is
the
interesting.
challenge, right?
Yeah.
the
So
whole
that meeting is
developing
happening
economy,
today.
Emerging economy bloc is dealing with debt restructuring, redevelopment of multinational development banks. I think the reforms are definitely needed there, because you have this multilateralism on one end of the spectrum, and you've got China's unilateralism on the other end.
Absolutely.
And this is a country which which doesn't have a free float when it comes to the currency. There's nothing stopping it from printing more and more yuan and trading them for dollar at a price which is not exactly a free float. So it is easy for China to fund emerging countries, other emerging countries outside of China itself, and lay out whatever terms and conditions which are beneficial to China. And we've seen the kind of debt that Ethiopia is facing, Ghana is facing, or the kind of debt trap that even a country like Nigeria is in right now. Leave alone what is happening in our subcontinent, leave alone what is happening with Pakistan or Sri Lanka, and our interests or disinterests in either of them. But I think this whole unilateralism of China versus, if I may stick my neck out and say, the ineffectiveness of multilateral development banks of the recent past have given China the edge. And that is something that the G20 countries would want to counter. So this reform of multilateral development banks, to my mind, is a very clear indication towards the G20 and our allegiance with US and whatever little influence that we have been able to build on US is to counter the unilateralism of China when it comes to influencing its economic power in the African region and in the Asian subcontinent.
And that perhaps is playing up also by the way of strengthening India-US ties. And since we were talking about it, Krishna Kumar, you know, the ties are stronger than ever, as reads our background, specifically on the back of what could be the possibilities in AI, what could be the possibilities in tech sector, and more specifically semiconductor.
Right. And for that, all of that you mentioned, there is a big move to break tech barriers between India and the US. And that is in the form of the Technology Exports to India Act. That is the name of the act, the bill, the legislation that has been introduced in the US House of Representatives, that's been introduced by Gregory Meeks and Andy Barr. Gregory Meeks, incidentally, is a ranking member of the Foreign Affairs Committee of the House of Representatives. And the other, Andy Barr, is the vice chair of the House India Caucus. So these two are really powerful members of the US House of Representatives who have moved this bill, this legislation. This is to tell you what are the chances it has of succeeding, of being taken seriously by the US House of Representatives. So this big move to break tech barriers, and it's happened on the same day as the G20 Summit. That's today, the 9th of September, when this is being tabled in the US House of Representatives. And the bill essentially, Shweta, what it does is that it breaks down the barriers in terms of conditions for the export of US-made electronics and related items to India. So which means that the bill will remove barriers to high-tech exports to India, specifically speaking, and many other digital computer exports from US-made to India without the need to get a license from the US Department of Commerce.
Krishna, sorry, I'll have to stop you here because, it's important in the context of what we were discussing,
Right.
with respect to China.
Right.
Now, India doesn't, or US will not need a license to export the same components to India,
Right.
which it has banned the export to China for.
Right, right.
And this comes at a time when India is actually bringing a lot of other trusted partners, so to speak,
Right.
into its own license list when it comes to import of the same high-tech equipment
Right.
and also the low-tech equipment like laptops, tablets and computers.
Right.
So, I think what is it telling you? What is your view
What is
on
really telling me
India-US
is that they're
trending?
trying to streamline. A country is always tries to streamline where it is exporting, where it is exporting from and importing to. So you sort of, channelize it to say the fact that I'm going to get technology exports from the US because the trust factor between India and the US is high. US is willing to do it. Now they're willing to create a legislation to do it. So you get a sense of the kind of relationship between the two countries. And then when you have China, where India is trying to stop everything from China coming into India, and then you have China on the other hand wanting to ban the sale of iPhones to its government employees, which means that they're trying to create a block to the US. So whoever is trying to create a block to the US, come to India, work with India. So that's the very simple geopolitics that plays out, that just goes back to technology, because let's face it, the future is all about technology. And so clearly governments across the world are first sort of marking their territory when it comes to technology exports and imports. Who are we going to partner with for technology? That is a national security issue. So what this entire thing tells me is that since technology is a national security issue, more and more focus on to streamline where imports are going to and where exports are coming from, to put it simply. And this bill, when it tries to do away with things like a license, where in the US, if you want to export to India a certain kind of digital products, you have to get a license from the Department of Commerce. That barrier goes away. It opens up business, and it also opens up free flow of technology between these countries. And things like supercomputers also. So which means that we're also talking about the future of technology. And when that future, if it gets created in the US, India gets immediate access to it. If it gets created in India, the US gets immediate access to it. Who doesn't get access to both of these things? China. As simple as that.
All right, interesting dichotomy playing out there as India and US strengthen their relationships. And when we talk about high tech, one thing that comes to your mind is perhaps a high tech computer, a high-tech technology in terms of servers. What more could high-tech entail? Because I remember we were sitting in the same studio and my colleague Amit Ranjan once talked about the prowess that China is when it comes to high-tech, when it comes to advancements in technology, and the same technology, of course, being built in the US. Both of these countries competing at a large scale, but India is not there just as yet. Now, this paves way for India to enter into that niche market.
So it also comes, Shweta, interestingly, there is definitely a narrative and a thought there, but it also comes at a time when, like Krishna mentioned, that iPhone sale to government employees in China has been banned by China. China just about 2 weeks ago had introduced an iPhone killer, so to speak, by the state-owned Huawei brand, right? The Chinese company Huawei. And the US has developed further suspicion on China, saying that there is no way that the semiconductor, the chips used in that Huawei phone could have been indigenously developed by China.
Okay.
And there is definitely some leakage which has happened, some transfer of technology which has happened not formally, not legally, where China has got access to those semiconductor designs and has been able to replicate them in China. And China has been known for this sort of, reverse backward integration and breaking down of circuits. There used to be a term for it. So not the reverse osmosis, but something similar to that. So you reverse engineering. Yeah, you reverse engineer, and you arrive at pretty much something that that exists in the market. So I think all of this is tying in at a time when US doesn't want China to access its technology.
Okay.
US feels that it will still need manufacturing to happen at scale other than India. So in the absence of China, we talk about China plus one, and we talk about how India is going to perhaps be the obvious fit in a China plus environment that is emerging globally. But I think the US is pretty clear that it has to be India minus China. It's not a China plus one, it's an India India plus
Plus,
whoever,
plus,
India
whoever
plus
that
plus,
is.
India plus one,
Okay.
India plus emerging
So
markets.
remove China
whatever.
out of the equation
so
entirely.
basically it's not a China plus, it is China definitely out of the equation, and
Do you
now
know,
let's talk.
now,
See how it
the
pans
way you
out.
build
It's
it.
interesting, yeah. I mean, he gave the example of mistrust of American companies invested in China or planning to go there or not being able to go there. Look at Elon Musk, the Starlink company. The Chinese allowed it to happen. It's doing well, but now they got suspicious of that particular internet satellite company of spying on Chinese. So they, that's one of the reasons that Elon Musk is looking at shifting out. Because of that growing mistrust between China and US. But we have our own set of problems. It is important to flag that India is also very, at one level we have this new thing coming up, which is which is putting the entire relationship in the tech front on a positive trajectory. But India is very, very conscious and cognizant of the reality of these big ticket technology companies from Alphabet to Meta, also so to say occupying more than their share of voice in the or share of mind in the Indian market. So when it comes to the policy piece about allowing them in India, like China has built its own parallel mirror system to whether it's Twitter, whether it is, they have their own
Google, I mean,
Google
Their own-
is not allowed.
their own-
China.
Is not allowed.
Yes.
So in that
E-commerce.
sense, yeah, so India has failed to do so.
UC browser, they don't
UC,
use Google
yeah.
Chrome. I mean, they've got a parallel for practically every technology
But I
that has
have
been
to
developed
ask
by the US.
Karthik, I mean,
So there are outstanding
practical
issues.
is
No,
that?
there are outstanding issues between India and US
Okay.
on technology piece as well. When we look at the technology in the larger context, that is about the key at the fulcrum of the conflict is that allowing servers in India for all these big ticket IT companies, technology companies. That's where they're not the fight between Twitter and Government of India. You remember when Ravi Shankar Prasad was the minister, the entire process of co-location of servers, that's an outstanding issue. And in that sense,
but wouldn't you say it has been resolved by the way of
Not
DPDP Act? Just
no,
as
the
yet?
act is, I don't think it's been
The
fully
fine-
resolved yet.
right.
I don't think any American company in this space is going to allow its entire server space to be mirroring itself in an Indian context.
Okay.
But actually, these are the deals that are under discussion right now. And
Yeah,
maybe
they're
if
under
Krishna
discussion. I'm
can
not
come
saying-
back and
yeah.
run us through these deals. I think we are talking about AI servers. We are talking about cloud. We are talking about data
Housed in
centers. We are talking, and I think this whole partnership which is happening between NVIDIA and Reliance Jio as well as Tata Communication is not restricted only to artificial intelligence servers and cloud. There is data center also, which
Right.
is going to be a very, very important component. And therein again lies the opportunity, I think, for global companies to do business in India. And I think no company can exist right now keeping India out of their radar for doing
Absolutely. I mean-
business. So if there are rules of the land that need compliance, then they would be complied with one way or another.
So I think
So
there will be a
if-
two-way movement. I think Government of India is also, she's right, there's the rigidity that it had, rightly or wrongly, is also getting a little more flexible, because you see in June Prime Minister was in US, the kind of response he has got, and now he's back here, and the independent meeting outside of G20 framework yesterday with the Prime Minister. So the sentiment is absolutely bullish. So in that sense, these little irritants are bound to be solved, and I think AI is one area where I think there's complete clarity. AI and semiconductors, rightly mentioned by Krishna and you, are, I don't think there's any disagreement. There is only the road ahead is full of convergence.
Okay. Well, Krishna's back with us. Krishna?
Right. Artificial intelligence and a regulation on artificial intelligence. That's where this whole thing began as far as G20 is concerned. Because even as artificial intelligence explodes, Shweta, there's constant concern that you will need a sort of a United Nations for artificial intelligence, so that you sort of control how this technology is developed and deployed, and clearly countries across the world are cognizant of it, and especially India as a president of the G20 this year is cognizant of it. Hence, it's part of the agenda of discussing a regulation for artificial intelligence, and then of course these corporate deals that have been getting struck over a period of time. It's not one day, as Karthik was mentioning, but it's been a months of build up to this G20 summit. AI powered supercomputers, clouds, generative AI. Let's bear in mind, we only keep talking about Chat GPT when it comes to AI, and that is a section of AI that's called generative AI. And there are many other versions of AI where AI gets deployed. So all kinds of AI, and I'm really hoping that, from this summit onwards, there's greater knowledge and acceptance of what AI is going to be in the future and what it means for governments. Because G20 is all about the governments, the top 20 governments of the world coming together to discuss the biggest piece of technology that will change lives of mankind going forward. So one is the business of artificial intelligence and the other is the regulation of artificial intelligence, Shweta.
All right, business and regulation, but in all of that, this reminds me of a plot that is playing perhaps, of Cold War time, where the countries have changed, where there's been a little divergence. It's no more US and USSR, perhaps US and China, and the tool has also changed. It's no more about who's going to build bigger bombs or bigger weapons, perhaps who's going to have better technological prowess, Karthik.
Yeah, I mean, no doubt, we are living in an age where technology and information technology, ICT, information communication technology, is the order of the day. And we know pretty well by now that the pace with which AI is going to change not just industry but change lives and have an impact not just on profitability of industry, not just on ease of use when it comes to people like us and the whole world out there. I think AI also has a very, very clear use case to influence elections.
It does.
Talk about deep fakes.
And therefore we need
talk
regulations.
About misinformation. Talk about, content getting created, generated, people saying something they never said because there is a tool that mimicked them. It mimicked the voice and it lip synced it and got them to say things.
Absolutely.
And at a time when US is also getting into election season, it doesn't want China to be faking around deep fakes, right?
Absolutely.
So I think there's a large use case for AI, and that AI is going to run on semiconductors, on GPUs, which are much higher than the processing power that traditional CPUs or servers had, and all of that is going to need investment, all of that is going to need semiconductors, and all of that is going to need collaboration between countries. And that race to win the AI race that we are all running, the aim to win that AI race is right now between US being the front runner and a close second called China. And what all is happening within China, we don't know yet. So there is a use case for US to actually prevent China from at least getting its own technology, which may be used to spread misinformation about US in the elections next year.
Absolutely. And all of those remain, of course, challenges. We've tried documenting those challenges. We've tried documenting what G20 agenda is likely to be, what all should countries be focusing on, and regulation around AI, around cryptos also remain at the top of the concern for all these nations, Rakesh.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, technology obviously is central to the entire piece in terms of who is controlling whom and how. So, that's where US and India converge. That's where I think many of these countries in G20 bloc converge. And both crypto is an area, as we keep saying. I mean, if you look at it as a completely, as a villain in all, I don't think that approach is going to work. Yes, with regulation, understanding exactly how is it going to pan out, and linking it to safeguards which are enough for India's interest, for the world at large interest, those are on the table. And I think we missed a full-fledged declaration on crypto as of now when the finance minister's track was there. But outside of that, I do see some convergence happening at the end of the summit when it really, we have a communication happening tomorrow. I mean, Amitabh Khan did say that the communication is ready. Of course, it has to be agreed upon. And, so the homework is there.
Right.
And G20 is not a 2-day summit; it's a year-long process. And there's a handover, and then it goes to Brazil from Indonesia. It came to India. So in that sense, there is that element of continuity.
Right.
I think it's got the momentum, and we must be a little patient to wait for the final communique to come.
Rakesh, if I can just ask you before Shweta moves on to the documentary that we want to play out, I believe, if we were to just do some ticks and crosses on what is on the agenda and what is finally likely to culminate in some sort of actionable agenda for the next G20 or some closure. Climate change, yes or no? Do you think we will have some resolution between G20 during the summit on climate change and climate financing, green financing?
There would be a resolution.
Yes or no answer, sir. Shweta will give me a Climate change, yes or no?
It depends on how we look at yes, because if
you're putting him in a spot. There can't be a yes or no on this.
No, it's very important to understand what is yes and no. India, the entire West calls developing nations as the real, villains when it comes to climate.
My yes and no is on
yes, consensus.
There would be consensus.
There would be consensus. There would be consensus.
Okay. Multilateral banks reform.
Yes, again, China is the villain. They will try and push the agenda.
But minus China, can we go ahead with a consensus?
See, as I said yesterday, they may not sign on the paper, but that document, that communication, and forget about communication, Karthik. What is important is that you're looking at, at the back end. No, at the back end. There is a front end, there is a back end. I think this G20 Summit will achieve a lot at the back end. But going forward, it's not a one-day match. It's a marathon.
It's been a year, sir. I mean,
going forward.
It's been 14 years actually since G20.
Yeah, to respond
and the agenda also keeps changing, and there are additions year after year. But specifically on MDB reforms, some consensus. Yes. Okay.
Crypto but not on the final communique. Let me add that, but because the final communique will have to be signed by all signatories, including China, so there is unlikely to be a New Delhi communique finalizing anytime soon.
See,
am I right or wrong in saying
because
that?
the heads of the states have to sign it. So I think there's a technical glitch there because there are two heads of the states are not
missing.
There. So in that sense, we'll have to really see how they word it and who signs. Maybe they make a departure this time.
I mean, in the age of AI, supercomputers, semiconductors, additional
digital signature
do the job, right?
but
a global framework for cryptocurrencies?
I think...
Will we arrive at a global framework?
I don't think so.
You don't think so?
I don't think so.
Okay. And what is biggest on India's sort of, interest right now? DPI exports?
Absolutely.
Some sort of headway on that?
Yeah, ADB has already picked up a thread, and Asian Development Bank is going to use this as a test case, and there are advanced conversations with emerging blocks where this is going to be one big ticket export.
And India settling trade in INR, at least with a few African countries, UAE,
as I said yesterday,
Singapore.
Test marketing, it's a pilot project. Don't put too much investment into this idea as of now, because the idea itself is taking shape. I think let's be a little realistic on that.
Okay.
All right. But it'll happen or not, for me personally.
But Shweta, using G20 from Indian perspective to have these bilaterals is going to be extremely important.
Right.
I think, it's not about headline management, but it's about creating parallel headlines, parallel tracks. So this big ticket railway project that I talked about, it is an outcome for India, which is significant.
Absolutely. And in fact, with UAE specifically, because we are going to have larger, partnerships with UAE, and the head of state for UAE is on a state visit. It's not just visiting for G20 at the moment. So it would be interesting to watch out as to what comes out. But personally, because I've been following the pavilions that have been built around, and a few things that stood out for me is India showcasing its prowess as far as UPI is concerned. So, not just the instant transfer of money anymore. It's about tap and pay, voice control pay, scan and pay. I think all of that to showcase it to the rest of the world, and to showcase it in such a grand scale and magnitude using AR, VR. I think that stood out for me.
The bigger message also, the West, we are friends right now with US, but they keep lecturing us on democracy. India is the mother of democracy. So that critical message from Modi, that 2,500 years ago, we put out the big message that world is one family. So that reference is extremely important, and they'll get to see it, and they saw it themselves.
And let's also allow our viewers to see a glimpse of what's going to be the outcome of G20, the hullabaloo around G20 as it's happening and as it continues to happen in the national capital today. Let's play up that documentary.
The concerns, the objectives, the challenges that are being faced by the global south get articulated by India as holding the presidency of the G20.
Cryptocurrency has no real use in the 21st century.
The more we have settlement in rupee, the more it will work in our favor.
If there are certain, easing of conditions, when you give the debt and then you allow that country to get out of it, that easing has to happen. Will China agree? Easier said than done.
New conception of the global south, so to say, I think is an important thing which India has driven.
In terms of economic agenda, I think a very important aspect would be that the concerns, the objectives, the challenges that are being faced by the global south get articulated by India as holding the presidency of the G20.
What's happening in the new order in the global environment is that there are bilateral groups, there are multilateral groups, there are competing competitive groups which are happening to try and shape up the global economic agenda. G20 offers us the great opportunity to be the spokesperson for the global south, and Prime Minister has repeatedly been referring to it, though the term is sinking in yet, both in domestic consciences and global consciences. What are the big ticket ideas? One of the big ticket ideas is reforming multilateral development banks, which again has been on the agenda for quite some time. And India has been pushing for reforms in the quotas. The decision on who will decide how much to give to whom and when and what are the terms and conditions, that's where the quota reforms is required. And again, here there are entrenched interests, which is the traditional ones, which is the US, though it's talking about reforms, and the new big threat is China, because in the neighborhood you could have noticed that China is, so to say, emerged as a big ticket colonizer. It's using the power of its currency, the power of its cash to expand its geo-economic interests, and thus expanding its political ambit. And should we push, we should continue pushing China, especially from the global south's perspective, in trying to come to a table that if there are certain easing of conditions when you give the debt and then you allow that country to get out of it, that easing has to happen. Will China agree? Easier said than done.
There's a larger context, where China is at the moment. It has a very strained relationship with the major powers of the West. There's a whole movement to isolate China in terms of access to cutting-edge emerging technologies. The risks around China. We should not look at it as China plus one. We have our own approach, our own perspective, and our own unique USP, so to speak, to offer to the world.
We have opened our economy. We are giving space to every global investor to come and invest in India. For example, Quid Car or G Medical, they have moved lock, stock, barrel from China, set up their shop in Pune, and from they now manufacture here and export to various countries out of India.
China has 40% of the export market for telecom, electronics, so that's a monopoly. And second is the geographical concentration, which because of the pandemic now we know the supply chain disruptions, etc., that it is not good to have that very heavy country concentration. So just licensing doesn't mean it's banned. It's just right now you have to license to import. In modern economic theory, we call it nudge.
Any restriction in today's environment, when we talk of free trade, between countries and geoeconomics driving geopolitics, would be seen necessarily not in the right light. In the narrative formation, this has already been seen as a retrograde move. Whether we like it or not, the world at large, the developing economies don't see us in the right context. I wouldn't say a backlash, but there will be a push for greater opening up. There's an example that people will say Apple is coming, now Foxconn wants to do a EV production in India, as we know the latest. There are episodic instances of big ticket investors coming to India, but does that translate into a big ticket movement for people really investing in India? There is going to be a challenge.
Clearly we need to bolster our manufacturing economy, our manufacturing base. And these are a series of steps that are geared towards incentivizing more manufacturing to happen in India. And it's not very different from the kind of thing the US is doing, right? Like the CHIPS Act and the various initiatives that the US government has taken in recent times.
The previous US president imposed tariffs on all kinds of items which affected us, which affected Europe. So it's not as if we are unique. Countries are doing it. There's a rationale which can be explained. So I don't think we will be under the scanner in that sense.
Crypto threat as well as an opportunity, but crypto is also an example that I use later to say how, unless global cooperation works out well, you're not going to be able to have a responsible financial ecosystem which can regulate it as well.
Is everything, right or wrong about crypto? We don't have that clarity. RBI has a certain view, Finance Ministry has a certain view, and in between is this the CBDC, the digital rupee, which has come at the cusp of policy. But I think these are early days, and India would be happier looking at a larger regulation at the global level on crypto from tax evasion perspective, from the perspective of terror financing, which I think is something that's closer to our heart because we're victims of terror in a big way.
My sense is that with AI, perhaps this may happen sooner than we think, just given the pace at which the technology is accelerating and innovating. We'll perhaps see more global activity around that much sooner, perhaps at some point even with cryptocurrencies and so on.
Cryptocurrency has no real use in the 21st century except to drug dealers, black money. This thing has a lot of use. Okay, so if you want to get into that business, it's a great thing. And just incidentally, it uses huge amounts of electricity to create this currency. So people think it just, it's a great invention. No, it's using electricity to create something which is just a secret.
The paper has not been discussed even within the country or in the parliament. I am sure that there should be legislation in place, and like it is being monitored, all the other exchanges are monitored, this should also be monitored.
What is the bottom line? I think the world is still not clear. So till that clarity comes on what exactly is crypto, what are its costs, what are its benefits, I think there's unlikely to be a clear way forward.
I was at an event where the CEO of NVIDIA, the chip company that is completely revolutionizing the world with AI, he was here and he had a very poignant message that India needs to build its own infrastructure. Why are you putting your data on data centers and cloud services outside of India?
The people who have to deal with this issue are all very clear that as far as India is concerned, we will regulate it in the interests of our people. Again, this harks back to what I said is our basic approach to economics, that we want competition as much as possible, but if there's need for regulation, we do not hesitate to regulate, for specific economic reasons.
Currency is again being seen as a huge political and economic tool now. Indian rupee, if you look at the current numbers, it's under pressure because people are investing, in dollars, and the crude prices have grown up. So unless and until we stabilize rupee to a very healthy environment, I think doing trade vis-a-vis rupee may be a good pilot project, for some countries where we are quite confident of that they would do this buying.
The more we have settlement in rupee, the more it will work in our favor. It saves us from the currency risk. We are not pegged at dollars, so definitely we run the currency risk every time we import.
The way in which the US economy is undergoing shifts, the manner in which China is responding to this whole isolation that's happening. So I think even in that bigger context, clearly that's an area of priority, and the government is making serious effort.
That is not a topic under the G20 discussion. So I expect nothing on that matter in the G20.
The biggest export from India going forward is going to be the DPI stack or India stack or the DPI architecture, and there's already a significant buy-in from many countries who are looking at what I call the Jam Trinity. And look at the poverty index globally. There are challenges both in the African belt and also across the world, where this particular template of empowering people with bank accounts, most of them women, underbanked, and also in rural areas, if you do the JAM profiling or the Jan Dhan bank account profiling, this template is relevant to many parts of the world, not just in the neighborhood. It needs to be transported as a big export. And the plus here is that there is no economic value to it. There is great influencer value, there is great impact value, and India becomes truly the thought leader. And anything that's at the cusp of technology, policy, and a game changer when it comes to the last mile connectivity has to have great appetite and great play.
Recently you had in I think Middle East, I saw a string of tweets by celebrities who were able to transact with the rupee in Qatar, for example. So clearly there is a push, a very conscious push by India.
Like now, UAE has agreed, Saudi Arabia has agreed, Kuwait has agreed, Iran has agreed, Qatar has agreed, many other, Australia has agreed. So many other countries have agreed, many countries have agreed, many other countries are being pursued. And this is some of the services should be exported because that's our strength.
The fact that a digital public goods approach results in, creates greater good, it removes barriers, it increases accessibility, makes, digital services universal. The big achievement of Prime Minister Modi and this G20 summit is this consensus that has emerged from the digital ministers, the digital economy working group, which looked at, the whole digital public goods approach and has adopted, a series of principles, set of principles that I think all the countries will look at. Can you export this entire stack itself as a technology? I think there the opportunity perhaps will be with the global south, some of the less digitally developed countries.